the settings most of the time mean the same thing. I'm going to be showing you how I edit my images on my mobile device, on my iPhone specifically. I'm going to be exploring some images that I've picked at random on my camera roll, and I'm just going to be messing with them, showing you my idea or what I'm thinking about whilst I'm editing those images. The next point is the saturation. What is saturation? Saturation just basically means the amount of color. So as a photographer, if you've obviously come around things like hue, saturation, and luminance, hue is actually the color. What is the color? Is it red? Is it blue? How much of that color exists is saturation. Saturation in itself is how much of the color. So when you increase the saturation, what it does is that it takes the image as a whole, and every color there, it just pumps in more of that color into that space. So I'm going to jump off this image. I'm going to go to the last one that we were editing. I'm going to go back into the settings, and I'm going to jump straight to saturation. Now with saturation, with this image now, I'm still going to let me just pull the black points out a bit because it's going to get darker here. But as I pull in the black points, I'm not really seeing the details I'm looking for. So I think it's the contrast. Maybe the contrast is a little bit too much. I pull that down. I bring some of the shadows out so I can see the detail. But as I'm bringing the shadows out, I can see that I'm losing some form of contrast. So I can pump in some contrast back in that. So yeah, that seems good for me. Now saturation is looking at the overall image. So look at the sky. We have the blue, the greens, and the grass, some of the yellows existing in that area. You see that as I'm going to push that saturation up, all these things will start to become more colorful. I'm going to push it to the limits so you guys can see what it is. Can you see how all the colors are popping? Sometimes it gets a little bit irritating when you overdo it. So I wouldn't advise that you pump the saturation all the way up. So starting from a point of 0, what I usually do is that sometimes I put some of the saturation out as much as I want, and then I can easily reduce it. Another method I also do is that I play with saturation and vibrance. Now, vibrance is different from saturation. Vibrance doesn't just pour the color on it, rather it just pumps in the contrast of each color. So it's almost like a contrast, which contrast manages brightness and darkness. But in vibrance, it just manages colors. So it's more like contrast in the color. So making the color more, when you add more contrast to a color, it makes it pop. So that's what vibrance does. So vibrance is what I play with a lot. And when I see that the vibrance is getting to a limit that maybe it's seeming a little bit too much or irritating, I come back to the saturation and I just pull it down a bit there to just find a balance somewhere there like that, you know, and that's what I do. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the warmth. Warmth in photography, sometimes if you even call white balance. What the camera is trying to understand is what white is. So when you warm up an image, depending on the lighting situation, it could bring the whites to actual whites or make them even look warmer. But whatever it is, and don't think about it too much. On an iPhone setting or whatever, when you look at the warmth, you just want to see how you increase the value, the image becomes a little bit yellowish, warmer, so to speak, and if you pull it down, it becomes colder. So it depends on the vibe, you know, that you're going for. You can bring the warmth all the way up, and you can see bringing it all the way up gives this very warm feeling. If you mess with the settings, you can even get the sepia vibe. But if you bring it down like this, you see it gets very cold. So for me, I just, you know, it's always about finding a balance for me. And I just, you know, sometimes I just want the warmth to be there. And whilst I edit that simultaneously with tints, so if I put the warmth there, I can increase the tints to bring down some of those colors back. At the same time, I can make it cold and go to the tints and bring these colors back here by reducing the tint. So you see, the tint is also like a tint of color, so to speak, that we kind of like pour over the image. So I play with tint and warmth at the same time, depending on the vibe I'm going for. So for this one now, I'm going to just bring the warmth down. I'm going to make it a little bit cold in a sense. And then for the tint, I'm just going to bring the color down to the space. I mean, it depends on the vibe. That's the vibe I'm going for in this image. I'm still even indifferent. And maybe I'll just bring the warmth back up a bit. And yeah, I'm just going to put it around here, basically at -20. And that's what tint is. Now, the next setting is sharpness. Straightforward. How sharp is the image? You increase it, the image becomes sharp. Now, so if I push it down to 100, see, it's almost like it looks like bricks, and that's a little bit too much. And sometimes I'm even losing color in that sense. Definition is almost the same thing, but it almost affects edges. Definition affects a lot of edges. So in the picture, anywhere where there are edges, like if they're the edge of the flowers and all that kind of stuff, you see that they become a lot sharper and well defined. definition. So noise reduction, obviously we know what noise causes noise, ISO, right? So if you're taking an image in a dark space or a darker environment, there tends to be noise, and that's what noise reduction does. Noise reduction can be used to somewhat cancel out this noise. What it does is that anywhere there's noise, it kind of like pastes on it and just makes it a little bit smoother. So when you overdo it, your picture might look rather too smooth with no clarity. So now in this image, as I increase the noise reduction, you might not necessarily see any difference, but if you look at it very well, you see that the image tends to look a lot, I don't know the word, there's like a paste on the image. So that's what it's trying to, because of all the dot noise on the image, it's trying to like, that's what the system is doing. It's trying to like clean it out in a sense. So that's what noise reduction does. So I don't advise that you do too much of this. You can just bring it 10 depending on the image. In this particular one, I don't even necessarily need any form of noise reduction, majorly because of the fact that I shot in daylight, everywhere is bright, so it's as clean as it gets. I'm going to go into one more image, or rather I'm just going to jump into another image so you would see how I apply the settings in another case. Now in this case, it was my friend's wedding a while ago. Congratulations to Emmanuel. So me and some of my old time friends took a couple of pictures. So there's this image right here. I'm going to go into the live settings, so I'm going to press and hold a bit and see where I want it to be, but I can even actually go into edit, go into live, and then select what parts of the image I want to be the image. So I'll just say, you know what, so in this image I'm just going to select this point where I'm pointing at Shay right here. So I'll say make key photo. I've made that my key photo, and I'm going to go to the adjustments, and in terms of the crop, I think, I don't know, I'm okay with the crop for now. I can also still think about it later. I don't necessarily think that there's anything that I need to straighten in this image. So I'm just going to go into the adjustments specifically. Now, I'm jumping up into the exposure. Now, in the exposure, I just want this picture to be a little bit brighter. And lots of the time, it's just subtle differences, subtle changes that you make to an image that makes all the difference. So I'm just going to increase the brilliance here so I can get a lot more detail. The highlights, so I'm going to pump up some highlights now. If you see what I'm doing, it's almost like I'm pushing the whole image out basically, but this is where the difference comes in. Now as I push the highlights, I'm going to bring the shadows down. See that we see, and then it gives it some contrast. Now I'm going to go into contrast and actually add contrast myself, not so much. I'm also going to come down to brightness. Brightness, I think I just put it at -4. It's already looking like what I want. Most of the time I always pull down the black points. I always want black to be very black, to be strong, and like that. That's it. That's what I'm doing there. In the saturation now is where I'm going to be messy a bit. I'm going to go to the vibrance first and then increase the vibrance. We increase the vibrance to 38. I'm bringing down the saturation to like -10 in this situation here. Yeah, that looks good. Now, generally, it's a warm image, right? So I'm going to cool it down so that I can see some of the color in the sky. If I put it at 0 now, the sky is kind of like blue, but it's not as blue as I want it, right? And then the environment looks a little bit too warm. So I'm going to bring it down a bit so that I can get more blue in the sky, and then even the environment looks a little bit cooler as well. And for the tints, I'm just going to increase it by like 7 here. And for the sharpness, if you look at it very well, I'm not sure I need to over sharpen it. I'm just going to pump in some sharpness and some definition, and not necessarily, I don't need to reduce noise. The last setting here is called vignette. Vignette is obviously basically like adding like a shade around the image. So you can add a black vignette. If you look at it, see how the difference that it makes in the image, and you can add a white vignette. So depending on the situation that you're in, I'm not really a fan of vignettes. I apply vignettes more when I'm taking portraits and headlock close-up shots most of the time, but in things like this I always want to see the space in the image. So for this one, I'm just going to leave it on 0. Now, messing with all these settings is something that you should be doing regularly, so that every image that comes from your phone, you have time to look at it and develop that image. It's actually called development, image development. Now, taking time to develop your image means that you're taking time to look at all the elements in the image and representing all the elements properly, especially the way you want it to be seen. And that's what I do. And it's so straightforward on the iPhone. I actually don't overthink these things because some of them are already like second nature to me. So I don't overthink them. I just make those images, mess with them on the iPhone a bit, or you know, I use the iPhone anyways, but you could still do that with any other phone that you're using and create some beautiful stuff. That's what I'm going to say. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode where I've edited some of the images and I've shown you how I work around some of this stuff. Please don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to turn on the post notifications to know when I post new videos. Now on this channel, I'm going to be talking about a lot more things. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. My name is Ibuku Williams. I hope you had fun today. See you in the next one. Ciao. Bye.